Everything shattered on a single Tuesday, as if the universe chose that day to break me apart. I'm Celeste Browning, 32, and just 1 week ago, my life took a nightmarish turn when my husband, Alan, died so suddenly I could barely believe it was real. He collapsed at work with a heart attack, leaving our 8-year-old daughter Eliza and me lost in a sea of questions and grief. But what happened after his death, the moment I turned to my own family for comfort, only deepened the wound that was already tearing at my heart. "Can we deal with this tomorrow? We're celebrating Felicia's birthday right now," my mother said when I first called, still sobbing so hard the words came out in broken, raspy sounds. Those were the first cracks of betrayal, a casual dismissal from the very people I assumed would rush to my side. Eliza and I clung to each other that whole night, barricaded in a home that no longer felt complete. I never imagined I'd have to cope alone, or fear what my parents might do next. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should have protected you during your worst moments, you'll understand what I'm about to share. Sometimes, the ones we expect to soothe our hurt end up pushing us deeper into it. Let me start at the beginning, back when everything glowed with promise and I still believed my family would always show up. Alan and I met at Lakecrest University during our sophomore year. I was floundering in economics, content to scrape by with average grades in that dreaded subject, when he appeared, my charming teaching assistant who offered to help me understand depreciation curves after class. I fell in love with his gentle eagerness to teach, but his booming laugh and the spark in his eyes each time he found a silly joke to tell sealed the deal. It felt like a scene out of a movie. I promised myself then that I'd never let such a supportive person out of my life. We dated all through college, forging an unbreakable bond in dorm hallways and battered library corners. At graduation, he got down on one knee, ring hidden in my diploma case, and proposed with that twinkle I adored. I was 23 when we married. People warned us we were too young, told us life experiences were still waiting, that we had decades before settling down. But how could I explain to them that I only wanted those future years if they included him? Once Alan completed his MBA, he landed a prized position at a prestigious financial advisory firm in Redwood City. He soared up the ranks, courtesy of his unusual blend of warmth and keen math skills. I'd watch him counsel clients with real empathy, and I beamed with pride to see him recognized not just as a number cruncher, but as a man who truly cared. After 5 fulfilling years of being a duo, laughing at inside jokes, planning weekend getaways, and savoring slow Sundays, we decided to have a baby. The road to parenthood, however, turned rocky. What seemed straightforward was anything but. We faced 2 miscarriages, countless doctor visits, and a failed IVF attempt that drained us emotionally and financially. Our hearts nearly broke under the strain, and we even discussed adopting. Then, I discovered I was pregnant with Eliza. The pregnancy proved brutal. I spent weeks on bed rest, feeling helpless and afraid. But Alan rose to the occasion, working from home, spoon-feeding me soup in bed, massaging my feet, and reading pregnancy guides aloud in that hopeful, excited voice. When Eliza finally entered this world, squalling and pink, Alan's eyes welled with tears before mine even did. He held her reverently, convinced any sudden move might break this tiny miracle. For 8 years, we were the family I'd always wished for. Alan coached Eliza's youth soccer team, despite being clueless about the sport. He watched tutorials online, learning how to dribble so he could teach her the basics. He never missed a school function or doctor's appointment. His calendar was color-coded with Eliza's name populating half the slotted times. Looking back, that was the best era of my life, the 3 of us together, forging our world in everyday moments. But we both shrugged off signs of Alan's deteriorating health. Now I replay them in my mind constantly. Mild chest pains we blamed on stress. Shortness of breath we said was because he was out of shape. A bit of high blood pressure we assumed was normal for a 39-year-old with a full schedule. The doctor told him to exercise more, cut down on sodium, and keep pain relievers handy. We listened without truly listening. That casual attitude still haunts me. The day he died was an ordinary Tuesday. The same day of the week we joked was the dullest. We had no clue it would mark a permanent shift in our universe. Morning brought dinosaur-shaped pancakes courtesy of Alan's playful heart. I rushed around packing my daughter's lunches and double-checking the day's schedule. Alan kissed us goodbye, promising to come home early for Eliza's school art show, telling me not to forget real maple syrup next time. He hated the fake stuff. Those were the last words I'd ever hear from him. Just after 10 a.m., my phone rang. Alan's assistant, Sienna, her voice trembling. "Celeste, something horrible happened. Alan collapsed in the middle of a client meeting. They're rushing him to Redwood Crest Memorial." I remember how my coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the kitchen tiles. With adrenaline pounding, I arranged for our neighbor to pick Eliza up, then I sped to the hospital, chanting frantic prayers under my breath. When I got there, it was already too late. Alan was pronounced dead at 11:26 a.m., just minutes before I burst through those double doors. "Massive heart attack," the doctors mumbled, as if labeling it could dull the horror. They said there was nothing anyone could have done, but it sounded so hollow. I stumbled into the sterile hospital room, staring at my husband's motionless body on the bed. His face still looked boyish, almost as though he might blink awake and grin sheepishly. But he never did. My mind blurred in the aftermath. Official forms, funeral home calls, tasks I was in no state to handle. Then came the cruelest moment, driving home to tell our daughter that her father wouldn't be returning. Having to explain death to an 8-year-old is an impossible task. I still see her small fingers tightening around her backpack as she asked if Dad would be there for her art show. My voice shook when I told her, "Alan got really sick, honey, and his heart stopped working." She stared, trying to piece together my words. "They can't fix it?" she whispered, and when I said no, she wailed in a pain I'd never heard from her before, a primal cry. She kept repeating she wanted her daddy back. All I could do was hold her as our tears mingled. That evening, once Eliza finally collapsed into a fitful sleep in my bed, hugging Alan's old t-shirt, I realized with a new ache that I needed my family. Maybe a mother's voice would anchor me in these uncharted waters. So I called my parents. I was shaking so violently it took 3 tries to dial correctly. My mother picked up on the 5th ring. In the background, I heard laughter, the tinkling of glassware, celebratory chatter. "Celeste, I'm in the middle of Felicia's birthday dinner. Is this urgent?" she said, sounding irritated. I forced the words out. "Mom, Alan is gone. He had a heart attack." Silence, then the rustle of her covering the phone to say something to the others. When she returned, her tone was awkwardly forced. "That's awful. Are you positive there's no mistake?" My breath caught. Did I really have to confirm my husband was dead to my own mother? "Yes, apparently." I managed. "It's real. I saw him." Her next sentence ripped me apart. "I'm so sorry, but we've got Felicia's 40th, the caterers, everything booked. Maybe we can drive up tomorrow. We wouldn't know how to console you right now anyway." And that was that. I sank to the floor, phone still in my hand, the dial tone humming. Betrayal stung as tears welded my eyes shut. My father got on the line briefly to ask about Alan's life insurance. Not about Eliza's state of mind. Not about my heartbreak. Just technicalities. I felt I'd stepped into some hideous alternate reality where empathy and familial devotion no longer existed. Within the hour, half the neighborhood knew what had happened. My coworker texted condolences, Alan's college roommate called, random acquaintances offered help. People I hadn't spoken to in ages gave more compassion than my own parents. I tried to keep it together for Eliza, but that first night was an endless loop of her nightmares and my silent tears. She cried out for her dad in half-sleep, and all I could do was stroke her hair and murmur that he loved her more than anything. By morning, reality locked in. Alan was gone, my parents were indifferent, and I felt abruptly alone. Even the funeral arrangements felt unreal. The ceremony was set for Saturday, 4 days after his death. I struggled through tasks like selecting a casket or choosing funeral flowers, balancing heartbreak and the need to remain functional so I could reassure our daughter. My parents called once, a brief conversation in which they double-checked the service time and asked whether they should wear traditional black or celebration of life attire. No offers to help plan or handle anything, just a casual check-in, as though this was some minor event they were forced to attend. On the actual day, a shimmering August sun mocked the solemn mood. Eliza insisted on a bright blue dress because Alan always said blue is the color of princesses. So I helped her style her hair how her father loved, a single braid near her temple. Family and friends trickled in with heavy hearts, among them Alan's co-workers in dark suits, openly weeping at the passing of a kind soul. I felt grateful they addressed Eliza with such tender concern, relating stories she might cherish later. Meanwhile, my parents and Felicia arrived late. They'd texted about being stuck in traffic, but they came in scanning the front row seats as if they'd accidentally dropped by the wrong event. My mother embraced me fleetingly, complaining that Felicia had gone through her closet in a panic. My father whispered, "We'll talk after," in a tone that sounded more business than consolation. I managed to deliver the eulogy, though my legs almost buckled when I reached the podium. I spoke of Alan's humor, how he hated cilantro, and always insisted on authentic maple syrup. It was a swirl of heartbreak and love, but as I finished, I glimpsed my parents shifting in their seats, apparently itching to be elsewhere. Their behavior felt like acid on an open wound, yet Alan's brother, Owen, had flown in from overseas and arrived mere hours before. Though ragged from the journey, he sat next to Eliza, holding her numb hands, the pair of them sharing the same tear-filled gray eyes as they mourned the man they both cherished. Afterwards, people gathered back at our home. Alan's co-workers addressed the arrangement of candles and photos with a gentle reverence. Our friends offered condolences that felt tangibly real, bringing compassion in bowls of homemade soup and trays of sandwiches. My parents, by contrast, perched in the living room, greeting guests as though the house was theirs, murmuring, "Thank you for coming," while sipping refreshments. I overheard my father telling my uncle how Alan had been on the partner track, how the life insurance must be hefty. The conversation felt exploitative at best, salt in the wound at worst. What made the day bearable was the unwavering support from Alan's family. His mom, Julia, kept track of Eliza, shooing away well-meaning but overwhelming visitors so our daughter could quietly color in the den. His father, Ronald, took it upon himself to tidy up as the day wound down, staying until the last guest left. They, too, were shattered by losing their only son, yet found the strength to comfort Eliza and me. When the house emptied, my parents and sister promptly vanished, citing the long drive. They gave me quick final hugs as though wrapping up a standard social visit. The ache in my heart grew heavier as the door closed behind them. I was left to face a house that felt emptier than ever, save for Julia and Ronald, who insisted on staying the night to ensure neither Eliza nor I confronted that darkness alone. 2 weeks later, I was finally sifting through insurance details at the kitchen table. Eliza had returned to school, though her teacher told me she often sat staring into space. I dreaded the moment my doorbell rang, and sure enough, there stood my parents on the porch. My father was adjusting his golf shirt, my mother applying lipstick in a compact mirror. They projected the air of people paying a polite visit. I had no clue how drastically this conversation would shift my life again. They wasted no time with niceties, sitting on the couch, so I felt forced to host them, even though I was the one drowning in grief. Quickly, they got to the point. "Your father and I are thinking ahead. Retirement? Medical costs? Since Alan's life insurance must be substantial, we hope you can help." I stared at them, ears ringing. My father pressed on, clarifying an actual figure, half of whatever I received. "We're your parents," he said, as though that entitled him to my husband's final security for Eliza and me. My lips parted, but no words came at first. When I found my voice, I practically spit. Alan died. This is not a lottery win. Eliza lost her father, and you want half? I'd never confronted them so directly, but the gall was too obscene. My outrage soared when my father had the nerve to scold me for being unreasonable. I told them to get out. They tried to argue, but I unleashed all the pain and anger swirling inside me. How they had ignored me in my darkest moment, how they couldn't even show up for their granddaughter, how their sole focus was money. Finally, they left, calling me emotional, promising I'd regret shutting them out. The door slammed, and I sank to the floor, trembling with both fury and heartbreak. Eliza returned home from school soon after, wondering aloud why her grandparents were here. The guilt in her small voice, the confusion, none of it was fair. But I told her truth. They'd come for money. That raw clash marked a turning point. I realized how deeply my parents had wounded me, how I had to protect Eliza, not just from the loss of her father, but from toxic influences with no sense of boundaries. Over the next few days, I got calls from them demanding a family meeting, texts from my sister calling me selfish, and guilt-tripping messages talking about how they raised me, how I owed them. It was as if decades of stored resentments and manipulations had exploded all at once, fueled by their greed over Alan's passing. I prepared myself for the next confrontation, determined not to yield. Eliza surprised me during that time with her quiet resilience. She sensed the tension and asked if she could do something for Grandpa and Grandma. I was wary, but she seemed insistent. Late into the night, while I wrestled with my own nightmares, I'd see a soft glow under her bedroom door. She'd be hunched over paper, scribbling furiously, refusing to say what she was doing. "It's a surprise, Mom," she'd whisper. When Sunday arrived, the day my parents demanded we meet, Eliza marched to the car with a manila envelope clutched to her chest. I asked if she wanted to stay with a neighbor instead, but she shook her head. "I have to go, Mom. Daddy would want me to be brave." I had no idea what she intended, but I felt a flicker of pride that, even at 8, she understood the gravity of truth-telling. We drove to my parents' house, where a handful of aunts and uncles also gathered, presumably invited as neutral witnesses. My parents likely hoped to shame me or corner me. They greeted us stiffly. My father's face was stern, my mother's forced smile unsteady. They barely looked at Eliza. They ushered me into the living room, launching straight into a speech about family obligations and how it's only right that I share a significant chunk of Alan's payout. They had a typed list of recommended distributions, 50% to them, 15% to my sister Felicia, the rest for me and Eliza. I stared in disbelief. They'd even printed out tables with actual dollar amounts. I demanded to know how they could be so callous, referencing how they barely offered any emotional support when we needed them. My father replied with a condescending argument that I was blowing things out of proportion, that I had to be practical. A nerve snapped inside me. Practical? I needed you around the night Alan died, and you wouldn't leave a birthday dinner. The room fell silent then, eyes downcast. My mom tried to hush me, but I ignored her. Maybe they were ashamed, maybe not, but their embarrassment meant nothing. This was about Eliza's security. In that prickly hush, Eliza stepped forward. She fiddled with the clasp on her manila envelope. "I have something," she said. My mother tried to dismiss her, but Eliza soldiered on. She pulled out a single handwritten page. Holding it out to my father, she said, "This is an invoice, but it's not for money." The document was a child's drawing that listed all the ways my parents had failed to be there since Alan died. Hugs when Dad died equals not provided. Comfort for Mommy equals not provided. Making me feel safe equals not provided. Under grandparents who truly care, she wrote priceless. And at the bottom, she put a total of 0. My father's face reddened. My mother's mouth fell open. Some relatives looked pained. "You didn't come when Dad died. You didn't help Mommy," Eliza said, trembling yet steadying herself as she repeated each bullet point. "So this is what you earned." She pressed the paper into his hands. I saw him read it, stunned by the truth spelled out in a child's handwriting. I let the moment stretch. A few seconds felt like an eternity. Then I said quietly, "I think we're finished here." I guided Eliza to the door, ignoring everyone else's muttered protests. My mother tried to call after us, but we were already in the hall. That childlike invoice had done what no adult argument ever could, cut straight to the disrespect, the greed, the rank failure of love. As we drove away, I felt an odd sense of release, a burning sadness that I might be losing my parents and sister, but also a fierce relief at setting boundaries. Eliza sniffled from the back seat, saying, "I'm sorry if that was mean." I turned around at a red light, took her hand, and said, "You were honest, sweetie. That wasn't mean. Sometimes people need to hear the truth." She smiled sadly. "That's what Dad always said." And I nodded, tears pooling. Even now, I could picture Alan's proud grin, the way he always found the right words. A part of him lived on in our daughter's bravery. And that was just the beginning of how this confrontation changed our lives, splitting my family into those who sided with me and those who sympathized with my parents' demands. But if there was one thing I learned, it was to protect Eliza and myself from anyone who saw Alan's death as a chance to secure their own pockets. Because at the end of the day, love is about showing up when it hurts, not about tallying up an inheritance. End of the first part. That raw clash marked a deep dividing line in our lives, splitting the family into those who understood why I needed to protect Eliza and those who believed I'd gone too far. Over the next few days, my phone practically burned with calls and messages from my parents, sister, and a few relatives who insisted we gather again to settle things properly. My sister, Felicia, bombarded me with accusatory texts about how I was selfish for refusing to share. The constant flow of guilt-tripping left me feeling like I was swimming through quicksand, but I stood firm. My priority, now and always, was my daughter's well-being. Meanwhile, Alan's brother, Owen, phoned every other day from overseas, offering steady comfort. He reminded me that from the moment Alan took out such careful policies, he'd done so with Eliza's future top of mind. Owen made it crystal clear he would support whatever decisions I made to shield my child from our family's greed. Then there was Patrice, my best friend since college, who dropped by every evening with a fresh meal or a listening ear. Her presence became a buoy amid the storm, a gentle reminder that some relationships are built on genuine empathy rather than blood ties. Through it all, Eliza astounded me with how she balanced heartbreak and resilience. She came home from school each day looking tired, yet determined to keep going, doing her math homework, coloring the pictures she loved, and occasionally glancing at an old photo of her dad on the refrigerator. Sometimes, I'd watch her silently press a small hand over that picture, as if trying to draw courage from the smiling face behind the glass magnet frame. Less than a week after our confrontation, my father sent a formal letter on corporate stationery. It spelled out how much he believed he was entitled to, with a vague threat that if I didn't comply, they might have to take other measures. I immediately forwarded it to our family lawyer, Hannah, a close friend of Alan's who had helped draft our estate documents. She reassured me no one could successfully lay claim to the money Alan explicitly left for Eliza and me. That letter, however, felt like a final straw. My own parents were threatening me. It was a cold, strategic maneuver that made me question whether any part of them still cared about us as human beings, instead of assets. Hannah then reminded me I could block their numbers and direct any future communication through her. At first, the idea seemed harsh, but after rereading that letter, I realized protecting Eliza from continued harassment meant creating real distance. My mother tried reaching Eliza at her school, but the faculty, already warned, turned her away. That was the moment I decided there was no line they wouldn't cross. I pressed forward with funeral documentation, finalizing everything Alan had in motion. The more I unearthed in his paperwork, the more grateful I felt for his foresight. He'd meticulously left instructions on how to handle each account, ensuring Eliza would have her college tuition, maybe a down payment on a house one day, no matter what curveballs life threw our way. Reading his well-organized notes made me miss him even more. Each spreadsheet and letter was fashioned with such care, overflowing with the love he couldn't express in person anymore. 2 weeks later, a smaller service was held at Alan's favorite lake, a place he loved for its serenity. I invited only people who had genuinely shown up for us in our sorrow: neighbors, close friends, Alan's relatives. We stood lakeside in the early morning sun, scattering wildflower petals on the water. Eliza tossed in a small note she'd written to her dad, sealed in a jar so it wouldn't disintegrate right away. She wanted him to read it in heaven, she said. It was quiet and personal, exactly what he would have wanted. My parents didn't know about this memorial. I'd told no one who might leak the details. We ended by sharing memories, even the silly ones like Alan's fear of spiders, and concluded with a promise to live in a way that honored his kind spirit. Shortly after, my mother tried one last call, which Hannah intercepted. Hearing that they intended to push for a family council finally pushed me to sever ties entirely for the time being. I told Hannah to let them know I would not be attending any meeting, nor would Eliza. All official communication from my parents could go directly to her office. If they couldn't respect that boundary, I was prepared to involve the authorities. My mother told Hannah this was unbelievable behavior from a daughter, claiming they only wanted to reconcile. Their version of reconciling, it seemed, involved me handing over part of the life insurance as a peace treaty. In the midst of this tension, Alan's parents stepped up in a way that restored my faith in family bonds. We'd always been cordial, but during his life we never spent a huge amount of time together. Now they checked on us weekly, offering to babysit Eliza whenever I needed time to think or just breathe. His mother, Julia, shared old stories from Alan's childhood over tea, making us laugh through tears. His father, Ronald, replaced our broken fence in the backyard with the help of a neighbor, refusing any payment. Sometimes I caught glimpses of Alan's mannerisms in their gestures, a tilt of the head, the same brand of gentleness. It was oddly reassuring, as though part of him still lived on in their small habits. 3 weeks after the heated confrontation, I arranged an appointment with my therapist, Dr. Mendez, who'd helped me through postpartum depression years earlier. I needed someone impartial to guide me past the avalanche of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, and guilt. The guilt, especially, gnawed at me for cutting off my mom and dad, like some old primal fear that I was violating the unwritten rule of honor thy father and mother. Dr. Mendez listened quietly, then reminded me that boundaries aren't acts of cruelty, they're necessary forms of self-care. You're not obligated to sacrifice your emotional well-being for the sake of people who show no intention of changing, he said gently. He encouraged me to focus on Eliza, on how the conflict might color her view of family. I already saw flashes of worry in her. Did standing up for herself mean she'd lose more loved ones? Did her grandparents hate her now? Despite these fears, she was resolute about what she called protecting Dad's gift. She understood in her grade school way that Alan left something so she'd have opportunities in the future. Watching my 8-year-old develop this strong moral core affirmed that we were doing something right, no matter how wrong my parents' behavior felt. To help Eliza process, I started a nighttime ritual where we lit a small candle and said one memory of Alan. She might recall how he danced like a goof in the kitchen. I might remember a road trip game we invented. Then we'd blow out the candle together, imagining we were sending our thoughts straight to him. Sometimes the practice ended in tender laughter. Other nights, tears. But it always gave us a few minutes of closeness, a reminder we were moving forward while still carrying him in our hearts. During the following weeks, my parents attempted to reach out in a series of confusing ways, fluctuating between apologetic notes and confrontational phone calls Hannah intercepted. One day, my mother wrote that she'd started seeing a counselor, insisting she was horrified by her own behavior. "I wish I could turn back time," she wrote, "and show up at Alan's funeral the way a real mother should." Part of me wanted to believe her sincerity, but I couldn't forget how she and my father had handled everything until now. Eliza, as usual, picked up on my anxiety. She'd stare at those letters I left unopened on the kitchen counter and ask if it was bad news again. Meanwhile, I found solace in the solid, day-to-day routines that anchored Eliza and me. Each morning, I'd help her pack her backpack, adding a little note Alan once wrote her, folded into a corner pocket so she carried his words everywhere. She'd return from school in the afternoon, telling me about her teacher reading them a story, or how her friend lost a tooth at recess. Those normal, childlike tidbits reminded me life went on, no matter how shattered I sometimes felt. Alan's parents visited often, bringing quiet support. We'd cook dinners together, Julia teaching Eliza old family recipes from their side, while Ronald tinkered with home repairs. I discovered how Alan's father had once been a carpenter, so he took it upon himself to fix squeaky doors or wobbly chairs around the house. The subtle presence of grandparents who genuinely cared soothed Eliza. They never tried to replace Alan, but simply kept his memory alive, gently and without pressure. Felicia, on the other hand, continued her social media tirades. "You can't just forget your roots," she posted one morning, implying I was rebelling against the family. Another post hinted that I'd betrayed her trust by withholding money that, in her eyes, she deserved. At first, I tried ignoring these digital potshots, but it hurt to see my own sister twist the story publicly. Patrice urged me to block her, reminding me I didn't owe Felicia an audience. Eventually, I did just that. My energy was better spent caring for Eliza and preserving any fragments of peace. The nights were hardest, especially when Eliza woke gasping, tears streaming down her face. I'd hold her close, murmuring that I missed Alan too. Often, she'd ask if people turned cruel when they lost someone, because that's what she saw in her grandparents. I explained it wasn't a rule. Some individuals just didn't know how to cope without taking. People could respond to grief in either loving or hurtful ways. She nodded, pressing her head against my shoulder. "I'm glad we're doing it the loving way," she whispered. Months rolled by. With each turn of the calendar, the initial shock dulled from raw pain to a throbbing ache. Grief didn't vanish, but it shifted shape. Some days, I could almost smile at good memories of Alan without feeling trapped in sorrow. Progress arrived in tiny steps. Booking a dentist appointment for Eliza without tearing up, because Alan used to do that. Passing the grocery aisle where we once debated over pancake mixes. It felt like learning to walk again, each motion careful and uncertain. Then came a breakthrough. One evening, as I tidied up the mail, I noticed another envelope from my parents, this time addressed in my mother's handwriting that looked calmer. Expecting the usual demands or half-measure apologies, I braced myself. But inside, I found a heartfelt, detailed letter that acknowledged each painful misstep from the moment Alan died. My mother wrote how she regretted the phone call when I needed her most, how she and my father had let Felicia's birthday overshadow our tragedy, how they allowed their fear of financial insecurity to eclipse basic compassion. Her words struck a chord. "We failed you at the worst possible time," she admitted. "I won't make excuses. I only hope you'll allow us the chance to show we can do better. I know this letter alone can't fix the damage." She added that they intended to see a family therapist consistently. It wasn't a quick formula for forgiveness, but it read like a genuine attempt at taking responsibility. Unlike previous messages, it did not mention money at all. Haunted by memories of her dismissive voice that night, I lost Alan. I wondered if real change was possible. I spent days mulling it over before reaching out to Hannah, who recommended caution. "Time is the only measure of sincerity here," she said. "Just remember you're allowed to protect yourself and Eliza first." She also reminded me that meeting halfway didn't have to mean forgetting the past, only acknowledging that people can learn from mistakes if they truly want to. Despite my reservations, I decided to let them see Eliza for a short visit under specific conditions: neutral ground, a public spot, and a set time limit, just like last time. My mother agreed graciously, no hint of the old whining or entitlement. She even asked what sort of gift might actually help Eliza heal, rather than showing up with toys or superficial things. I suggested they write her a letter, maybe share positive memories about Alan. Then they could hand it over in person if Eliza felt comfortable. My mother agreed readily, saying she'd pass the request to my father. On the day of the meeting, I chose a small bookstore cafe near the waterfront, an airy place where Eliza and I had gone a few times to read and sip hot chocolate. We arrived first, securing a table in the corner. My parents showed up on time, both looking as though they'd dressed carefully, not out of vanity but out of respect. Subdued colors, no flashy jewelry. Immediately, I saw the nervousness in my father's stance. He gripped his car keys a second too long before pocketing them. Eliza sat with her hands folded, watching them. Slowly, her grandparents approached, my mother's eyes glistening with tears. "Hello, sweetheart," she began gently. "We've missed you." Eliza nodded but didn't move to hug them, and I respected her caution. They took the seats across from her and placed a small, wrapped box on the table. "We wrote you something," my father said, voice raw. "We'd like for you to read it whenever you feel ready." Eliza considered the box, then peeked at me. I gave her a tiny nod. She slipped off the ribbon and opened the lid, revealing a bundle of pages tied together with a short piece of blue yarn. The first page, in my father's handwriting, said, "Memories of Alan for Eliza." She stared at it for a moment before gently closing the lid again, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, so quiet I almost missed it. My mother started to reach out, then withdrew her hand. A fragile truce hovered between us. The next hour passed in tentative conversation. No one mentioned money or the old demands. My mother asked about Eliza's school projects. My father inquired about which books she was reading. It was far from perfect, and at times the silence felt heavy, yet it was more than I'd dared hope for after all that chaos. When the time ended, Eliza stood up. "Bye," she said, pausing as they rose, unsure whether to hug or wave. Then she gave them a timid hug, first my mother, then my father, stepping back swiftly afterward. I recognized that not everything was mended in a single meeting. The trust they broke would take a long time to rebuild, if it ever fully did. But as the four of us parted ways in the bookstore parking lot, I felt the faintest glimmer of something new stirring, an opening that might heal, given enough time, the rifts they created. And deep down, I sensed Alan's gentle spirit urging me to give grace while never abandoning self-respect. Over the next few days, Eliza handled that fragile reunion with an even more thoughtful grace than I could have imagined. She kept the little box from my parents on her nightstand, occasionally lifting the lid to peek at those pages. Some nights, her tears would slip out as she silently turned each sheet of her grandparents' recollections of Alan. On other evenings, she found a small smile, murmuring things like, "I never knew Daddy once got stuck in a tree when he was 10. She read those stories the way one would read a treasured diary, and I allowed her the space to process them in her own time. One evening, while Eliza curled up on the sofa with her math homework, I set my phone to speaker and called my parents. It felt like tiptoeing into unknown territory. My mother answered first. I heard relief in her voice when I said hello. A wave of awkwardness lingered, like we were all learning a new language, one that demanded accountability, not avoidance. Still, she told me about her new counselor, about the work she was doing to understand how her actions had impacted me. My father's voice chimed in now and then, subdued, far from the stern lectures I grew up with. We kept the call short but cordial. By the time I hung up, I realized I was trembling, both from residual anger and the eeriness of being on a more normal footing with them. Soon after, a letter arrived from Felicia. The envelope had no return address, but a floral design hinted it was hers. Inside, she wrote that she'd lashed out at me in public only because she felt overshadowed by my life, overshadowed by Alan's success. "It's not about the money," her note read. "It's more about not wanting to be left behind, as I always have been." At another time, I might have dismissed her claim. Now, I understood how twisted insecurities could fuel terrible actions. She closed with, "I know I can't undo what I did after Alan's death, but I'm trying to be better. If you ever feel ready to talk, I'm here." It wasn't an apology that fixed everything, but it was the closest Felicia had come to acknowledging the pain she'd inflicted. Eliza asked about her aunt sometimes. "Is Aunt Felicia still mad at us?" she said. I tried to explain in simple terms how Felicia felt like her life wasn't moving forward the way she wanted, and that she'd handled it poorly. Eliza frowned, fiddling with a rainbow bracelet. "Do you think she's sorry?" The question lingered without a neat answer. I told her that people can change, but it has to come from inside. We'd only know with time. As days slipped into weeks, those changes became more visible in small, tentative ways. Felicia didn't post about me anymore online, and I heard from mutual friends that she'd started taking on side jobs to support her art, rather than asking others for handouts. Maybe it was an olive branch, a sign she'd recognized the damage done. During that stretch, Alan's parents continued to fill the gap, creating pockets of stability even as new fractures and possible repairs surfaced. One Saturday, Ronald offered to teach Eliza how to ride her bike without training wheels. She was both excited and terrified. "Dad wanted to do that with me," she admitted, pressing her lips together. Ronald paused, eyes wet, and nodded. "Then consider this my honor. I'll teach you the way Alan learned from me," he said. They spent the afternoon in the driveway, Eliza wobbling on the bike as Ronald trotted alongside, guiding her handlebars. When she finally cruised a few yards solo, the look of pure joy on her face lit up the entire street. Julia and I clapped from the sidelines, both harboring tears of pride and heartache. In that moment, the ache of loss merged with brightness, as if Alan himself were cheering her on from just beyond view. That same night, Eliza slipped the door to my room open, carrying the pile of memories from my parents. Wordlessly, she crawled onto the bed. "Will you read these with me, Mom?" As she handed me the handwritten pages, I saw references to Alan at every age: childhood fishing trips, silly pranks with my father, an embarrassing middle school dance. It stunned me to recognize that for all my anger at my parents, they had preserved these pieces of Alan's life. Many were stories I'd never heard him mention. Reading them felt like unlocking a new chamber of my husband's world. Eliza listened raptly, occasionally giggling, especially at how Dad taught Alan to tie a necktie by practicing on the family dog, or how Mom once found him climbing onto the roof to retrieve a ball. A few stories ended in tears, the reality of his absence pressing in. Yet, by bedtime, Eliza and I held those pages as if they formed a bridge, one my parents had quietly built despite the mess they caused. She drifted off, hugging her stuffed rabbit and wearing one of Alan's old t-shirts. Normally, I'd tuck her in and slip away, but the weight of everything we'd just read pinned me to the bed frame for a moment. I stared at the nightlight's glow on her face, thinking how she looked so much like him. My heart ached with conflicting emotions, fresh sorrow for his missed future, and gratitude for the love he'd given us. Part of that love still thrived in the shape of her determined little face.